welcome to another episode of the Snowy's Camping Show. Today with Ben and Lauren. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast or watching on YouTube. And join in our Facebook group, Snowy's Camping Banter, for any of the conversations around episodes or anything really camping related.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're talking about down versus synthetic, specifically relating to sleeping bags. And I guess the same sort of information can be applied to clothing, like insulative clothing, which we don't sell, or we used to a long time ago, 7 years ago or something like that. But just in relation to sleeping bags, and I thought it was probably a good topic to cover because we're starting to see a bit more crossover, I guess, of those insulation materials in bags for different purposes. And what I mean by that is traditionally you would get down in sleeping bags that were expedition bags or multi-day hiking bags, and your synthetic bags were quite sort of heavy, bulky car camping bags, right?
Yep.
Whereas now we're starting to see some synthetic bags that can be utilised for hiking and trekking.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to see some down bags moving more into that camping and forward driving space.
Yep.
So the choice out there, the range of choice in different insulative materials is a lot broader now.
Well, the quality of the synthetic fills has certainly come a long way. It's much finer synthetic fills that go into the synthetic bags nowadays. And while it's still true that down has better compressibility, when you look at the pack size of the bag versus the warmth you get out of it, I guess warmth to weight ratio, you get more warmth for less weight out of down still than you do synthetic, but synthetics come a long way, and there are some real benefits to synthetic bags over down, cost being one of them in particular. But when you got the likes of Primaloft and some of these new synthetics, and also just the way they put synthetics together in bags nowadays, you can get quite good efficiency out of a synthetic filled bag. As good as efficiency as a down, but it's going to weigh a little bit more.
So in terms of the actual insulation material, so down sleeping bags are made from the feathers of geese and ducks.
Yep.
And it's not, obviously when I think about feathers, I think the ones you find when you're out in the bush and whatever, and they're really hard and rigid. Obviously it's not that. So it's the close, like literally it's called downy layer, right? That's the closest layer of the feather to the skin.
Yep.
Generally tends to be quite short, quite fluffy, which is part of what is the insulative factor for the birds.
It's a little puffy sort of ball really that just if you look at a close-up of it, I don't know how to best describe it. It's like something from outer space almost. It's just it's not shaped like a feather. It doesn't look like a feather at all.
No.
But typically you get geese and duck down. Duck down is generally a more affordable alternative to geese down, which has got better warmth to weight once again out of it. And then there's different ranges in the down as well in terms of cost, where a more affordable bag might have duck down and a certain percentage of feather in it as well. The higher bag will have a really low percentage of feather, almost no feather, and be goose down, which gives better warmth to weight.
And because I guess because it's that fluffy feather, it traps the air, and therefore you get, as you've mentioned before, you get a much higher level of warmth for the mass or the total volume of the feather.
Best way I describe it is to grab a handful of like 600 loft down and a handful of 900 loft down. Sorry, not a handful. Grab 10 grams, is probably actually a fair bit, and put it on the table or put it in a large tube without a top on it and let it loft up. Both weigh 10 grams. That's 600 loft down, and I'm just pulling figures out of the sky here, might rise to about 10 centimetres up in the cylinder, whereas the 900 loft goose down might rise to 15 to 20 centimetres high. So you've got more insulative layer for the same amount of weight.
So, and synthetic fibres are typically polyester?
Typically, and it's how fine, I guess if you go too fine with the synthetic, it becomes weak. But the likes of Primaloft and I can't think of any other brands off the top of my head, sorry, but the way they put the synthetic sheets together, and they're not little individual fibers, they're put together in a sheet. And then
like
that's
insulation in your roof, right?
A little bit like that, yeah. And then that's put into the sleeping bag, and typically there's in a basic camping sleeping bag, it will have a sheet of synthetic, and then you'll see stitch lines in it to hold it in place. That stops the synthetic from moving around, but it also pinches the top of the bag through to the bottom and creates a potential cold spot. The more technical bags might have multiple layers put together of finer, higher tech sort of fabric to loft up further. And I know even the likes of Cedar Summit's bag use I think it's Wave Loft, I think is the name they give it, which from my understanding is sort of a flat layer, but then the layer on top is stitched on in a wave type manner to give it more loft as well. So instead of just two layers together, they're trying to get extra loft out of less synthetic to try and close that gap between what down and synthetic can do. So if you are in the market for a bag, sleeping bag, and you are daunted by the choice, which is big nowadays, right? I know Cedar Summit, just in one brand, have got a big range, and they've made an effort to try and make their range more shoppable, I suppose, to understand how it all sort of fits together. So there's some key things that you would approach, I suppose, in trying to make the decision. And I think at the end of the day, if you've thought of all of these things and you've come to a decision, you're probably not going to end up with the wrong bag. Even if you made all the right decisions, you're probably going to find there's going to be some conditions where you want something slightly different for certain conditions than others, but you've just got to make a decision.
That's where it helps to have more than one bag.
Get two, yeah. I think I've got three.
Yeah.
But warmth and insulation is obviously, or warmth ratings are obviously the main one. So that goes into like the temperature ratings, which we've done another podcast on. We'll link to that in the show notes. But as a general rule, you can get most sleeping synthetic and down bags for the same set of ratings. If you're getting a really, really cold bag, a down bag is probably going to be very bulky if it's synthetic because you need so much extra synthetic fill in there. But the temperature ratings is a good place to start. So like a -10, -15 is probably a good all-round bag for camping for most of the season and hiking for most of the season.
Yeah, if you're talking, are you talking about synthetic bags here specifically? Because the other thing, because I guess the thing that's important to note here is when you're looking at a sleeping bag, if it's not EN/IO tested, that means that the rating the bag's been given is essentially best guess by the manufacturer.
Yep.
There's nothing really to back it up, and I'm assuming that they make best guess based on the weight of the insulation compared to potentially other bags in the market and where they sort of see themselves sitting. Whereas if you go for something that's been IN/ISO tested, you know that regardless of whether or not it's synthetic or down, it's undergone exactly the same process for determining the insulative value of that bag, and therefore you can rely on that temperature.
It's still a guide though.
It's
a level playing field for testing. So if they've been, ISO is the Australian standard, EN's the European standard. If they've been tested to that standard, then any bag that's gone through the same test is going to be pretty much the same rating because it's been tested in a lab with a dummy with temperature sensors on it to perform in a certain way. Doesn't mean you will be warm in that temperature because everyone's different, but we're going into a lot of detail, I suppose, that we've been into before, haven't we?
Yeah, so. If you want to know more information specifically about what temperature bag you should go with and how your sleep system affects, different elements of your sleep system affects how warm you sleep, and the testing standards. We did an interview with Cedar Summit, sleep system ratings, and it was one of our first ones, like episode 4
Dean.
or something back with Dean. So that's definitely worth a look if you want to go down a bit more of a detailed look at that side of things.
So start with a temperature rating, work out what temperature you want. Like I said, if it's a summer bag, 5 degree plus. If it's an all-round kind of winter bag, look for -10, -15 because you can unzip the bag to cool it down. But that's the main starting point. And then have a think about the conditions you're using it in, I suppose. So moisture being the main consideration there. And we say that because down is impacted significantly by moisture. Now, the down nowadays has treatments on it to try and resist its taking up of moisture. The fabric on the outside has a DWR treatment, which gives it some waterproof, or we should say water-resistant properties to try and keep the down dry inside. But if that down does wet out, like if you get a big bulky down bag and dampen it, it'll fit almost in your palm. Down just goes to nothing when it's wet, and then it has no insulation properties. So you've got to keep that dry. So you probably need to think.
And it sort of can clump together as well, and it won't
Yep. So you need to think about where you're using it. And I put this out there as sort of one of the first considerations, because if you're, say, a kayak camper, or you're canyoning and carrying all your sleeping gear with you or something like that, where your sleeping bag is in the water all the time, you're trying to keep it dry. It's probably in a dry bag, but there's a chance that it's going to get wet. And synthetic's probably a better choice, because synthetic will still have some insulation properties even when it's wet.
Yeah.
Whereas down does not.
And it will also dry quicker as well. So often if you get a down sleeping bag wet, it takes a long time to dry it off. And it's even a consideration as well if you're going somewhere humid, maybe you're sort of hiking in the tropics, or it's sort of other like humid spaces, synthetic might not be a great option for you.
Yep.
There's also the other consideration of condensation. So we get some calls from people who use down sleeping bags. They're not in anywhere humid, like they're not wet or anything like that. However, the bag is affected by condensation because they have heavy, heavy condensation within their tent. And so that also can play a part.
Yep.
So I think in that circumstance, I mean, condensation is the arch enemy of campers, worldwide, right? Like it's not exclusive to hiking or exclusively a down bag issue, but just something to be mindful of if you are in a condensation prone environment, to make sure that you're keeping up that ventilation and stuff in your tent, because it's not actually going to be your bag's fault.
So the only way to stop condensation is ventilation.
Yeah.
So breathability is one there as well, in terms of or just comfort inside the bag, I suppose. Down being a natural product, is going to breathe potentially a bit better than synthetic, but I think that's a smaller consideration nowadays than it ever used to be with the performance of fabrics on bags now.
Yeah.
But you may find down being a natural product is potentially a little more comfortable to sleep in, a little bit like wearing a cotton or a woolen top versus a synthetic top. In some climates, synthetic can feel a bit clammy, whereas a cotton can feel pretty comfortable. Yeah.
And I guess by breathability, like sort of in layman's terms, it's a greater variance of temperature, right? In the sense that if like I have a -10 bag that I can use year round. Oh, sorry, dropped my pen there. That I can use year round because I don't overheat in it as readily as I would in a synthetic bag. And you do always have the option to zip them open and things like that. But I think a lot of people might go, I don't know about buying a -10 down bag because I don't know if I'll ever get to use it really other than a few trips a year. Well, it's like, you actually use it all the time. Like there's no problem with that.
I think you touched there on features too, which we won't go into in this conversation here, but take all these things with a grain of salt, consider them all, and then look at all the features in the bags too, because Cedar Summit's bags in particular, we keep talking about Cedar Summit's bags, but they come loaded with all sorts of free flow zip features that suit just about any climate. So consider all these things, but don't get too bogged down on one element, because if you buy a good quality bag and you've considered it from start to finish, you're probably going to be happy with it in most climates.
Yeah.
Moving on to weight and compressibility is another big consideration. We threw it in there predominantly because there is an obvious difference between the compressible size of a down bag of a similar of a down bag to a synthetic bag of a similar temperature rating. So if you are an ultralight hiker, if you're operating out of bike panniers and you don't have much space, you're probably going to need to go by default to a down bag. And maybe make some compromises around that moisture issues that you might have by using down dry bags, because the down bag is going to pack up so much smaller and keep squashing down smaller and smaller than a synthetic bag. Down almost feels like you can just keep squashing it. Whereas synthetic kind of gets to a point where you almost feel like you've got a hard stop.
It's got a brick, right?
It.
Like
That's
it's
as
just
far
not
as
going.
It's going to go. So, and then particularly if you're lightweight adventuring in really cold climates, then down's almost by default what you're going to have to go for.
Yeah. And I know that some like Cedar Summit synthetic bags are designed to be able to be compressed. Whereas if you were doing something if you were someone who was doing a long-term trip, like if you're bike packing, say, and you want to go around Australia, you, like you say, you're going to have to go down, because even though your synthetic is going to be able to be compressed, I don't know how well it would be performing after months of being compressed every single day.
Yep.
Versus down, which would still obviously do that.
Yeah, we should touch on storage there as well, because while these are compressible, it's also best to store them lofted. So
yeah,
probably,
which is why some come with a bigger storage cube. Yeah,
they do. Yeah, the down bags, down's impacted more by being stored compressed. You need to store it lofted more so it can loft up. Synthetic, not so much, but still benefits a lot from being stored uncompressed, because it kind of gets a memory and you get it out and it sits really flat, a bit like if you get a new sleeping mat, the first time you unroll it, it sits there and look really flat, not being lofted up. That synthetic gets a memory, so you need to give it time to loft up. So have a think about where you can store these things as well. If you can store them uncompressed, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And I think the other element to this is pack size. I mean, we're talking a lot about ultralight adventurers, multi-day hikers, backpackers, things like that. The other consideration, which has made me start to look at down a bit more, is that especially with bags like Cedar Summit's Base Camp, which I recently did a review on, which I loved that bag. That was like so impressive to me. But the idea of, if you've got a large family and you've got 5-6 sleeping bags to pack, and, the ones that we use at the moment, we've got like Oz Tent River Gum sleeping bags, and they're massive.
Yeah.
Like the kids find them really difficult to pack them away by themselves, even as teenagers, and they just take up so much room. And if you want to just go away for the weekend, or you have a smaller car and half of your boot is already taken up by sleeping bags, can be a bit frustrating. Whereas if you go for a down alternative, it's a completely different situation. And so for me, I'm looking at, or for two of my kids in particular, I have actually invested in a down bag because they're also wanting to go on school camps and maybe start to do like some overnight or 2-night hiking trips with friends as they get older. And it just makes all round, it's just a better option.
Then the other end of the scale is rooftop tents. We're talking heavy duty or heavy items, not lightweight, but heavy. Even that base camp bag, like you say, is too big for hiking. But if people want to pack their bedding inside a rooftop tent, that down bag is going to pack so much easier inside some of those rooftop tents that don't allow a lot of space for bedding. You could fit that and blankets in there probably because it packs down so much more.
Because it compresses so well,
So long story short, down is far more compressible than synthetic.
Yeah.
Durability and longevity. I reckon down, if treated well, lasts longer. But in reality, if you buy a good quality bag, you will have paid less for a synthetic bag than a down bag. You're going to get the lifetime value out of the bag.
Yeah.
No matter how you look at it, if you look after them.
The only additional point I'll have to say on this, and I reckon that within our family, we have synthetic sleeping bags that have been around for 15, 20 years. They're starting to get a bit thin and a bit threadbare, but, they'll still work. I also have a friend who has a down sleeping bag that they've had for 17 years. And about 4 years ago, they just sent it off to a place in Melbourne who just carefully unpicked the stitching and put in a bit of extra loft and stitched it back together and sent the bag back all revitalised and fresh. Whereas you don't have the option to do that with your synthetic bags. Yeah. And so from that sense, I think in terms of just your everyday sort of standard usage and making sure you're looking after it properly, they both last the same amount of time.
Yep.
But you do have the option to give your bags a second life or a bit of a top up if you're going with down.
I guess you can rejuvenate down potentially for far less than the cost of a new bag. I used to work somewhere where they did that, and there's just this massive bale of down in the corner, and you just pick up handfuls and put it in the bag. So you can rejuvenate down and wash it, gives it new life. So over time, synthetic breaks down, like you say. Can't fix the synthetic. Really hard to replace because you go back to those sheets. It's the full length of the sleeping bag. So you're pulling the whole bag apart to try and replace the fill. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
But down you can rejuvenate and refill.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In terms of, I mean, we would recommend, I mean, I'm sure you would too, Benji, but we would recommend using a liner wherever possible with your sleeping bag because it's a lot easier to just wash a liner than it is to wash a sleeping bag.
Yep.
But when it does come to that sort of care and maintenance side of things, it's a lot easier to wash a sleeping bag. That is a synthetic sleeping bag, than a down sleeping bag.
That was a bit of a process.
And sometimes they, might often have to be taken somewhere to be laundered, or, I've washed one at home before, but then had to take it up to the laundromat with 10 tennis balls in the huge big tumble dryer to just make sure it's not, because when it's drying, you need to make sure that down is being constantly broken up and not drying together in a big clump, which is
when you wash it, it dries as a clump. So then you need to spend time breaking that clump up. And it is tedious. Yeah.
Yeah. Huge tumble dryer with tennis balls. A great idea.
Yeah. Nice. Moving on, cost and value.
Yeah.
I think in terms of value, I think it can't, most of the bag, in our range, I can say that any price you pay for any of those bags is good value.
Yeah.
If you pay $20 for a bag, you're going to get $20 of value out of a bag.
Yeah.
And it's not going to last you very long. If you pay $800, you're going to get $800 of value out of the bag if you look after it well, but you're spending a bit more upfront. But prices, I guess if we're talking high quality synthetic bags, you're starting probably $200 to $300 up to, I can't think what the new Spark Pros are, or the Alpine bags. They're $800-900.
Hang on, you're talking about down?
Down, yeah.
Yeah. So just within our range, right?
Or I'm talking about the whole, if you're talking down and synthetic, a good quality bag, good quality synthetic starts at $200 to $300.
In our range, we have some down, good quality down, really lightweight summer bags or quilt type things around $200. But looking at down sleeping bags, anywhere between $300 for your really good quality down sleeping bag, right the way through to $1,000+ for a real expedition quality going to Antarctica sort of.
So $950+ down,
minus
lightweight
30
fabrics.
degree sleeping bag, you're looking at $1,000. But realistically, if you want a good all-rounder down sleeping bag, you're going to be forking out about $300.
Yep.
As a good quality, but base level.
Yep. And that's kind of where good quality synthetic starts.
Sort of, you mean good quality synthetic ends?
Ends. Yeah. Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, that's the higher end. Sorry, I'm not wording myself very well there. The higher end of a good quality synthetic bag, and then it goes down to.
So with synthetic bags, we've got as low as $38.50 through to our max, which is $360.
Yeah. So the $38.50 is the kids need a sleeping bag until they grow out of it type scenario.
Yeah.
That
Correct.
does the job.
And so that's your synthetic, and that includes all your quality synthetics and or whatever. The maximum, which was a double heavy duty double -15 full driving bag, was $360.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas your down starts at about $300 for it, Okay. So it's sort of that's your down is definitely a more expensive option.
But it potentially lasts longer as well.
But,
so if you start to look at it over the lifetime of the bag, especially those $38.50 bags, you're probably going to have bought them 10 times over if you buy a down bag.
Well, I guess that's the thing, the whole price, that's just the price range. But if it comes to value for money, I personally think a down bag gives you that value for money. And the only reason why I say that now is having purchased down bags for the kids, seeing how much more use they get out of them. They just reach for them every single time, even for a sleepover at a friend's, every time. Down bag, going on a school camp, down bag, want to go on an overnight thing with down bag, going camping, down bag. The other bag is still there. It's in the same cupboard, never gets touched.
Yeah, okay.
So that's what and for them, they don't really care down versus synthetic. So for them, they're going for the bag that they obviously enjoy using more.
Yeah.
So there's obviously the elements there of comfort and overall feel and warmth and
your kids are a bit older now, I suppose, but we haven't mentioned this. If you're talking about durability, I suppose, well, they're both durable. A down bag's construction is potentially more prone to damage than a synthetic bag. So if you're looking at kids, and I talk about my daughter who's got an old black wool synthetic bag that she like walks around the house in and does worm on the floor and all these sort of things.
Yeah.
I would keel over if I saw her doing that in a down bag because you've got baffles and stuff inside that can tear and they're lighter weight fabrics. So while we say I agree with you, a down bag is a better long-term investment if you can afford it up front. I don't think you'd be disappointed in the future once you've made that investment.
Yeah.
You probably would be disappointed if you got your 5-year-old an expensive down bag and they played, I don't know, like sleeping bag races in the backyard in a down bag and then tore the baffles up and then all the down sitting in the foot section and doesn't do anything anymore. So just have a think about maybe when you move to that down bag for the kids.
That is true. Yeah, my kids are a bit older now. But I do actually recall recently there was a time where they were like, oh, I'm packing my sleeping bag. And I was like, actually, I want you to take the Oz 10 one just because it's,
Yep.
So, yeah, that is true.
Cool. We've got a summary here and I feel like the summary's
right. I'm going to
I guess the summary is covering what we've just covered.
Summary to cover what we've just covered. I'm going to do down bags. You're going to do synthetic just so we can smash it out.
Righto.
So your down bags advantages are you get an excellent warmth to weight ratio. It's highly compressible and therefore very packable. It has superior breathability and temperature regulation. Can last for a really long time with proper care, and also you can rejuvenate it if you want. And it's a natural fabric and potentially eco-friendly if sourced responsibly, which we didn't touch on, but there is a certification, RDS, Responsible Down certification or RDS,
I think it is,
It's RDS.
So a lot of the good quality bags will come with certificates and stuff to say that they've.
The disadvantages is performance when wet. Sorry, that's my pen again. Performance when wet, higher cost over synthetic options, can require a bit more careful cleaning and maintenance. Potentially it could be an allergen as well for some people, it being a natural material. And then the only other thing is that ethical concern, but I think most bags these days are RDS. There wouldn't be very many companies or quality or decent bags that don't come with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's still people out there, rightly so, who just don't want to go down that path because it's an animal product. Your individual choice, that's fine.
Yeah.
Synthetic bags, advantages. Big one is the moisture resistance. So if you're in damp, humid environments all the time, a synthetic bag is going to keep you warm, even if it is damp. Affordability is obviously, we've pointed that out before, far easier to get a synthetic bag in your camp kit in terms of the bank balance than a down one, and easy to care for. A lot of down bags you can machine wash, hand wash is easy, drying is quick. The water, because it's synthetic, the water just runs out of it. It's not soaking into the fabric, it's just running out, so it dries quickly. Disadvantage of that though is obviously the bulk and the weight. So while there are compact synthetic bags, the equivalent in a down is going to be far smaller than the synthetic bag. So you need to make sure you've got space in a pack in particular if you're using a down bag, a synthetic bag, sorry. And that kind of goes hand in hand with thermal efficiency as well, in that you need far more synthetic to give the same thermal efficiency or warmth to weight that you would out of a down bag.
Great.
Cool.
Thanks.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode on down versus synthetic bags. I want to know if money wasn't an obstacle, because I feel like that is the obstacle for most people when looking at a sleeping bag, if you'd go with down or synthetic. What
would be your choice? All-rounder, hiking, camping?
Or an all-rounder for hiking and camping, I would go with the Altitude bag from Cedar Summit. But dream scenario, which I'm actually 50% halfway there, is the Spark women's bag for compact multi-day hiking and the down base camp.
Okay. I'd get the Spark Pro for everything.
Spark Pro for everything?
Yep.
Yeah, I just can't be in a tapered mummy bag unless it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And on that note, have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.